Thank you so much for joining, Richard.
Thank you very much.
Third time, this time.
Yes.
And we're still in the series of, explaining what are sort of good behaviors for leaders that are leading transformation.
Yeah.
In the human-centric context, of course. That's our shared love.
Yes.
And today, one of the behaviors that we selected is understanding their context. And for me, there are various threads that we can pull on today. But I think a few, just to set a bit of the context, is you are running, right? Listeners are running transformation.
Yep.
That means they're balancing the existing system.
Yep.
And they're trying to move towards something, right?
Yes. Yes.
So I think one of the challenges is, okay, how do I make sure that I understand maybe conflicting interests right now, right? Existing system versus where we want to go. And the other part is also, I think, more on a personal or individual level, is I think also when you're just starting out as a professional, you're really focused on yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And the content that I need to bring.
Yes.
And the more senior you become, the more you realize, first of all, it's not about the content, right? That's maybe 10%.
Yeah.
It's about connecting with others. And the more comfortable you feel, the more you are able to switch the perspective from you to the other.
Yeah.
And I think, but there I'm really curious about your experience. The same holds true if I'm more of, let's say, a junior CEO, or I'm new to the role or new to the company. I think there's also a risk of being more focused on you than focusing on the other leaders around you and what they need.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's a bit of the context of diving a bit deeper into understanding their context.
Yes. So, a few thoughts on that. One is, I think you're right. So the starting point is that everyone has a story. Everyone has their own issues, their own challenges they're facing. And so starting with a high level of curiosity and humility can be helpful, because the chances are I don't understand your problems or the things you're facing. So actually starting out with a sense of let me be really curious about understanding what are the challenges that you're facing that might hold you back from being able to really pursue this transformation or whatever it may be. Because it's very easy for me to kind of jump to conclusions or make assumptions or even project. Sometimes, for example, we talk about empathy, and empathy being able to feel what someone else is feeling. Sometimes we use the phrase, put yourself in someone else's shoes. And we need to be careful with that, because if I put myself in your shoes, then I project myself and I think, how would I react if I was in your shoes? And I'm already projecting and imagining things that are about how I'm going to react, which may or may not be how you're reacting. So, we just need to be careful that it's not putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It's really feeling what they're feeling.
Trying to understand their shoes.
Understand their shoes, understand how they're reacting and feeling. Because, I think quite a lot of what people think is, I'm being empathetic, I'm putting myself in their shoes, maybe just me projecting myself into their shoes, which is not the same.
Yeah.
So that's one thing which is important. The other thing, you picked up on this point around being more self-oriented or more selfless. And there's two things there. I think you're right. In general, if you want to build connection with somebody and build trust, one of the key parts of it is being selfless. And, if I come to you and I clearly have your interests at heart, you're going to be more likely to listen to me, more likely to engage with me. Whereas if I come and say, I need this from you, it's clear, but it's not going to engage you in the same way. And so being aware of that is important, that, so that always thinking what's the other person need here? How can I be helping them? Tends to be a better way of getting that engagement. And if I'm under pressure and under stress, as everybody is these days in our VUCA or BANI or whatever world,
crazy world,
everything's going on. The problem then is that what happens is I move from a kind of safe, co-regulated state where I can be more balanced and I can see everything that's going on. And it's very easy to get triggered or drop down into a kind of fight or flight, sympathetically activated state. And the problem then is that your whole body and your whole physiology prepares to essentially to deal with some threat, because what's happened is your autonomous nervous system has kind of picked up, there's some danger here. This is not quite as safe as it was. And, and it drops you down into a state where you're preparing to either fight or flee or fix, or, there's a few other things, but the problem with all of them is that they are relatively simple responses and relatively narrow responses. So what tends to happen is that you become a smaller version of yourself. You lose the sort of wider capacity to see all the possibilities. You just become focused on, let's say, flee. So, okay, how do I get out of this situation, or fight? How do I defend myself against this person? And you stop seeing all the other possibilities. You stop listening. I like to use the analogy of a horse in a race with blinkers on. Often if you have flat racing, they'll put blinkers on the horses so they don't see what's going on around them. They just focus on, running down the
tunnel
track.
Vision.
You become that. You become the tunnel vision, the horse with blinkers on that just doesn't sense what's going on around it. And that's problematic, because then you lose all of those wider capacities. So the point is, if I'm stressed, I get dropped down into this kind of sympathetically activated fight, flight, fix, freeze mentality, and I now approach you, it's going to come across as selfish and it's about me, because I'm feeling unsafe. I'm feeling I need to sort of make myself safer. That's all about me. It's not about you. So it's then very hard for me to come across as selfless and connect. Yeah.
And you also see in your experience working with CEOs, indeed, where you can see a clear difference between maybe not newer in the role, but maybe newer in that organization versus more senior?
Well, I'd say I think there is definitely something around newer in the role. I think there's an inevitable sort of cycle that people go through, whereby I think most CEOs who are first-time CEOs have some degree of imposter syndrome, some degree of a sense of, am I really good enough? I know I've been chosen, but I've never been a CEO before. I'm pretty good, but am I going to be good enough? And there's a slight insecurity there. And in many ways, if it's not too strong an insecurity, a slight insecurity is helpful, because that keeps me curious, humble,
sharp,
listening, and actually I'm really receptive, because I'm thinking, I'm looking out for and looking to learn, looking out for things that could be a problem, and I'm not assuming that I know the answers. So actually, in a way, that a moderate degree of imposter syndrome creates quite a lot of healthy and helpful things.
Learning, right?
Yeah. Problem then is, at some point, I progress from that. I get, let's say we're 6 months, a year, 2 years into the role. The results have been good. I start to become more comfortable. I lose the insecurity. Potentially, I get into a sort of sweet spot where I'm still humble and curious and learning, and everything is going really well. The risk is that it then tips towards, I now start to think I'm rather good at this being a CEO business. Maybe I start to feel overconfident. Maybe that tips towards arrogance. Maybe I start to think, I don't need to consult people because I know what to do. I've seen this. I know the playbook. And there's a risk that it tips towards, arrogance, overconfidence, and that can be very dangerous, because especially in a world where things are chaotic and uncertain, I may say in my head, I've seen this playbook. I know what to do. But actually the world has shifted slightly, and it's the same playbook that worked last year isn't going to work again. Yeah. And then, and that can be a real problem. So there's something about a sweet spot. And I think there's something interesting for all leaders, frankly, about how do you manage to stay humble and curious while you grow in confidence and capability?
Yeah. I really like the link also to curiosity, right? And also there, I think the link to authenticity, because, right, you cannot fake being curious, right? So a coach told me to be curious, so now I'm being curious about you, Richard, right? You would feel that instantly.
Yes.
And for me, also one of the tiny habits, right? So for each behavior, we have one tiny habit example.
Yeah.
And this one connected to focusing on the others is, before I even, have a conversation with a fellow leader about transformation, I already think about, hey, what kind of pressures can my CFO be under, my CHRO, that might conflict transformation? Because what I like about it, it's turning us into co-creating a solution, right? It's not,
Absolutely.
again, me versus you. It's us building things together.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. And in fact, if you push that even further, so you go beyond the individual to the top team or the broader organization, you've got lots of individuals who are all going to have slightly different views and be in slightly different places. And what's important often is that, I think in many cases, especially in a world that's becoming more complex, issues are not simple, cut and dried, we're just going to solve it and move on.
Single view.
There's lots of different views. It's a dynamic balance. We sometimes use the term polarities to describe the fact that it's, what's going on is we need in a way to recognize that there are choices at opposite ends of the spectrum. And in some ways we need a bit of both. So for example, a classic one in many large organizations is, on the one hand, they want global scale and efficiency. At the same time, they want local tailoring and customization. And so you want global scale and local customization. And what often happens is that you end up in this kind of dynamic where there's a sort of pendulum swing where at some point in time, everyone says, what's really important is local customization. Everyone rushes towards local customization. And then we start losing the efficiencies of the global scale. And at some point, it becomes so problematic that the pendulum swings back and everyone says, right, what we really need is global scale. And then you have a few years of pushing towards global scale. And then suddenly you're out of touch with your local customers. And this kind of pendulum swing is relatively common because, it's a human thing to like solving a problem and think, okay, this is the problem. The answer is this, it's a simple solution. That's what we're going to do. And that results in this kind of unhelpful pendulum swing. The reality is you need both. You need global scale and local customization. And so the challenge for leaders now is often, how can you get both and, which is much more of a kind of complicated dynamic balance. And you need to hear the voices on both sides and you need to be thinking, how can we get the best of both? We're not going to be able to just solve this simply and just go in one or other direction. We need a kind of something that's a little bit more fluid, a little bit more flexible, to tap into both. And I think that also sits here because, no matter how switched on and smart and great I am as a CEO, I'm not going to have all the answers. And there's a risk that I won't see all the perspectives, take them all into account, and then think about how do we get this dynamic balance.
And have you seen some sort of tangible examples from companies you work with on how to actually make this work, or some tips for listeners how they could do this? Yeah.
The classical way to work through this is actually to take a representative group of senior leaders and have a kind of a workshop where you go through the exercise of, dividing them out into groups. So typically you might divide them into, those who are more favoring centralization and global and those who are more favoring local customization, and have them start by mapping out what are all the advantages of their position. So you then fill in a kind of, a flip chart with all of the good things about global scale and all of the great things about local customization. And then you have them swap over and they fill in charts for what are all the downsides of global and what are all the upsides of local customization. And that gives you these sort of four different quadrants, if you like, of the pros and cons of both ends of the polarity. And then you get them to engage and sort of, in a way, build empathy for each other's positions and kind of go around all of those and understand and reflect on what are all those different aspects that we need to, look for as benefits and watch out for as disbenefits. And then you can start moving into a conversation around, okay, so how do we get the best of both worlds? What are some things we could do? How do we start to spot when some of those downsides are appearing and we need to take corrective action? What are some mechanisms? What are some processes? What are some ways that we can navigate this kind of dynamic balance and then start to think about what does that mean for how we take this forwards? So, I mean, that's essentially, a way of doing it. But it takes time and it takes empathy and openness from people and willingness to learn and listen and recognize that your point of view isn't the only point of view.
Yeah. And also you're saying, I think it's something that you then actively track and manage, right? Because you want to, be adaptive also here to not go too far to the left or to the right.
Exactly. It's often helpful to identify what might be some early warning signals that says, okay, hang on a second, we're going a bit too far towards global. We're losing some of that local customization. What might be some of those early signs? Maybe it's some of the signals we pick up in our customer surveys, or there's something. What are those? What are the sort of canary in the coal mine early signs that say, hang on a sec, we've got the balance wrong. We need to adjust before it becomes a whole scale shift. Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's also really helpful if you can make those signals as tangible as possible, right?
Absolutely.
Ideally, some metrics and then you, reassess it like on a quarterly basis. Hey, are we still moving in the right direction?
Yeah, no, exactly. But I think actually, in a way, there is value even in just doing the mapping exercise that I described and just understanding the pros and cons of both ends of the polarity. Even just having everyone having that visibility is really helpful, because then you can go, okay, now I sort of see the pattern, and you can see that the typical way that it plays out if a company is not managing the dynamic balance well is you push towards the advantages of, let's say, global. And over time, as you stay there, you start slipping down and seeing the disadvantages of being global, and then you push towards the advantages of being local. And then over time, you slip down, you start seeing the disadvantages, and you follow this almost. It's like an infinity figure, a kind of a lane down figure of 8, and you swing between them.
Yeah,
and that can't be the best way of operating. So how do you avoid those big swings? How do you see the whole picture, and how do you manage that balance so that you're mainly in the top half, focusing on the pros of both sides, and watching out for when do you start seeing some of the kind of the downsides coming through. But it's interesting so in order to do that, even just as we're thinking about it, that's not a solo leader thing. That's a very collaborative, involved, broad input from people across the organization, communication, talking to each other, sharing, that's what you need. And so again, in terms of what you need from a leader, it's a leader who is prepared to encourage that level of openness and listening to each other and empathy, rather than sitting there thinking, it's my job to have all the answers and I'm just going to tell people what to do.
Yeah.
That's just not going to work.
Yeah, and I think also what also popped in my head is that, of course, often employees feel sort of here we go again, we've been here before. So I think just making explicit, right, the exercise that has been done, or of course, involving them into it.
Yeah.
I think it's also super helpful to explain, this is the rhythm that we've been going through and we're trying to prevent it now.
Yeah. No, exactly. And look, and I think also the reality is, in a world that we live in, there've always been these polarities, but it feels to me like more and more of the issues that we face in business are more complex, do have these polarities. And actually the role of a leader is, in a way, is managing multiple polarities on different dimensions across a business. And that requires a more human, engaged type of leadership that is listening and working with people, not just defining the direction and dishing out the guidance from the top.
Go off, sit on the beach, come up with a solution.
Yeah.
Guys, I got it. Let's go.
But it's very tempting. But we like, as if again, in the old world, and for many of us as we were brought up, we like certainty. We like having a solution. We like having an answer. We like being right. And all of those things don't go away. So just noticing that and realizing that and recognizing that in order to be this more transformational leader in complexity, we're probably going to have to work on our tendencies to want a simple solution, to get to an answer, to be right, to know things. And all of those are going to be trickier. And for us to be effective in a way, therefore, we have to be aware of our tendencies and find ways to keep them in check. And
I think it's both, right? It's both. There's not one solution anymore, and there's also not one way to get there.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's exactly right. And again, this it sits in the space of managing other people, but actually, as with many of these things, it also comes back to managing myself. There's an element of, if I'm going to be, managing people effectively and really listening to them and understanding what's the issues they're facing, I need to be managing myself so that I am as effective as possible in doing that. And again, it's back to this idea of, as a leader, if I feel my role is about knowing and doing, I'm going to be running around. I'm more likely to be telling people. Actually, there's this quality of being and just being with people, to be able to listen to them, to be able to have them feel safe to open up. And the being part doesn't feel as active. It's not doing, it's being. But the quality of being and presence with somebody is really important if you're going to get them to open up and really share what's going on for them. And also for them to feel safe, because if we go back to this world where, everything's quite stressful, everyone's a bit overwhelmed. If I risk being triggered, as we've said, I'm running around like a horse with blinkers on. Potentially everyone in the organization is running around like a horse with blinkers on. We're not going to get to the right answer. So this is where, my behavior as a leader is really important, both in terms of me being able to calm myself down, take the blinkers off, be more balanced, but then creating an environment where other people can also take the blinkers off, feel safer, have more open conversations. And so there's a sort of meta level as well. It's not just about tactics or what I do. It's actually, it's how do I shift more to being, to encourage others,
to do the same.
And then we can have better conversations.
Yeah.
If we're all in stressed, running around, overwhelmed, doing mode, we're never quite going to get there.
And any specific tips? So what can a leader do to move more towards being, or just have this conversation? Any examples that you saw maybe from leaders who inspired you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that, a couple of things. One is just being more aware of how am I reacting to different situations, and noticing when I am becoming triggered or not triggered. And so the more that I can be aware of that for myself, I can then create a different field, a different environment around me. And so some of that can be around better noticing.
Also on a physical level, right?
Yeah, exactly. And some of that comes from practice. And also making it safe for people around me to share their views, because it may be they notice that I'm getting triggered before I do. But if I've talked to them about it and made it clear that they let me know exactly, and it's safe for them, then maybe they can help. There's kind of priming myself so that I take a moment to calm down and slow down before I go into a situation which I know is going to be stressful, because I can probably then stay grounded and stay safer longer because I've primed myself going into it. There's also then, once I notice that I'm off center, what do I do about it? So, and it may be that there are things that I can do to calm down in the moment. The classic one is breathing exercises, which, you can kind of do during a meeting, during a conversation without anybody really noticing it. And it's just the idea that at one level, slow, steady breathing calms the whole system down, because breathing is one of those things that sits at that interface between conscious and unconscious. And when we feel unsafe, what happens is our body pumps out adrenaline. The adrenaline makes our hearts beat faster. We breathe a bit faster because we're preparing to fight or to flee. Breathing, because it sits on that interface between conscious and unconscious, it's affected by the feeling less safe, but it's also something that we can consciously control. So if we control our breathing and deliberately slow it down, it sends a signal back to our unconscious system to say, don't worry, I feel safe because I'm now deliberately breathing slower, so I don't need to prepare to flee or to fight. I'm okay. And so that calms the whole system down. So breathing exercises can be very powerful. And I think also the more examples we have of great leaders who are clearly very human-centric in how they do things, and there aren't lots and lots, but there are increasing numbers. We need more. But I love some of the stories of people like Hubert Joly, for example, who was clearly very much a human-centric leader of a huge global Best Buy organization. Exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think all of these things kind of come together, but there's not a simple magic bullet. And it's at the end of the day, it's down to individual leaders to decide that they want to do things differently. It's back to the Viktor Frankl quote about so Viktor Frankl, the Austrian Jewish psychologist who was locked up in Auschwitz, wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, which is a very powerful book, but there's lots of interesting insights. But one of his quotes is, and I may not get the wording precisely right, but is, between stimulus and response, there is a sort of a moment, and in that moment there is an opportunity to choose, and in that choice is our freedom and our power. And what I take from that is the idea that if I'm feeling overwhelmed, stressed, not safe, what tends to happen is when a stimulus comes at me, I react. I'm not choosing at that point. My autopilot is running and I just react. I'm the horse with blinkers on. I'm a lesser version of myself. But actually, we always have the opportunity to choose, to notice that stimulus, and before we do something, to pause and to make a choice. How am I going to act next? And if I take that choice, then I have the opportunity to act in a different way than my autonomic system would have done. Yeah. Effectively, I switch off autopilot and I choose something else.
Yeah.
That's the most powerful kind of moment, and that takes kind of presence, awareness, noticing, and the ability to kind of pause, switch off the autopilot, and choose to do something else. If I keep practicing that, I will shift easier over time. It gets easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, it's also really related to the pausing and thinking, okay, am I responding in line with my values, right?
Yes.
Am I being the leader I want to be?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's right. There's, Carol Kaufman, who's a fantastic coach, has a great question, which is kind of to ask yourself, either going into a meeting, who do I want to be in this moment, or actually in those moments of pause, who am I being and who do I want to be right now?
Yeah.
And that's a great reflection that can sometimes tilt us to say, actually, I was about to do this. That's not who I want to be.
Yeah.
I need to do something else.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating, I think, is that most of the time we do operate kind of on autopilot. We don't realize that we have an infinite amount of choice every moment to do something different
while we're running,
and we don't take it.
Yeah.
And so actually at one level, this is about taking back control, taking back the ability to choose, which we have. It's just that we've given it away to the autopilot. And
do you know why? Do you think that maybe it's easier for most people, or not conscious?
No, I think it's as simple as the fact that if you think of all the data and the information that's coming at us, actually we can't process it. It's a little bit like we just don't have the computing power. So we need to run on a sort of simpler set of rules and behaviors. It's why we like stereotypes, why we like simple solutions. We make assumptions because it helps us kind of get through the day. If we were thinking about everything all the time with full intensity, we couldn't do it. We'd be overloaded cognitively. So actually, these subroutines are very, very useful. The autopilot is very useful, but the key thing is, sometimes we need to switch off the autopilot. So how do we notice when we need to switch off the autopilot? Yeah. And so it's like noticing enough that we can go, hang on a second, this is a moment to switch the autopilot off and go back to manual control. And then we can put it back on later. But, being able to be sufficiently aware and present that you can notice when you switch the autopilot off, that's the important thing, I think. I think the reality is we need the autopilot. We need to sort of simplify all of the signals that are coming at us, because we can't just take them all in. We can't process them all all the time. But there are moments when we need to choose. So that's.
Yeah, for me also, I think in one of the other podcasts, I also mentioned I was reflecting on, a leading transformation. And I'm still so surprised on how many people are sort of letting their calendar, define what they're doing.
Yeah.
So it's also, okay, what do you choose? Do you choose to lead transformation based on your calendar, or you choose to lead transformation because of your values, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that's right. And it's and potentially, in a world where you need to have some ability to flex, you've got to build some space into your calendar. If you just have your calendar rammed, you're never going to be able to do that. I think that's right. Yeah.
Something popped up?
Well, so the only thing that popped up was, in a way, the skill that we need in the moment to be able to work out, do we leave the autopilot on or not, is a little bit like the triage nurse in a battle situation. So, the triage nurse would be the person who is receiving patients coming off the battlefield, and basically they divide them into one of three groups. Either they've got something which is not too serious, maybe a broken arm or something like that. Just put them over there, make them comfortable. We can get to them later. That's not life-threatening. Then you've got the people who are coming in and they're bleeding out. We need to get them straight into theatre. We really need to work on them now, because if we don't, they'll be dead within an hour. And then there's the people who, unfortunately, are not going to make it. So we need to put them over there, give them morphine, make them comfortable, and unfortunately, we're not going to be able to save them. And in a way, it's that if we need to be having that sensation with our nervous
system.
So that as things come at us, in a way, the the autopilot is running everything as if it's, either if we're feeling overwhelmed, everything goes to theatre, or we kind of ignore everyone and they just
they're all about to die.
They're all about to die, or they're all fine. But so being a bit more, deliberate about spotting. I was about to let that one go and just assume it was okay, but this is one that needs to go straight to theatre, needs some proper thinking. I need to really, really work on that.
Yeah.
Spotting those and not missing them, because those are the lost opportunities.
Yeah. So just to sort of, work towards a nice ending, I always like to make it also really tangible, right, for the listeners. From all the things that we shared and discussed, if there's one thing I could start doing tomorrow as a leader, feeling, hey, I want to be more aware of my autopilot, what's sort of one tangible tip that you would give?
I think I would say just have a go at practicing being present with yourself. So noticing what's going on. One of the ways to bring yourself to the present is to notice physical sensations. So one of the things that you can do is literally just notice the sounds around you, or the lights and the colors, or if you rub your fingers together, you can just feel the little ridges on your skin where you have your fingerprints. Very small things like that just bring you to a sensation of what's going on now and make you very present. That can be very helpful, because then as you go into a situation, you're fully present. You're not thinking about, I've got another meeting later that's going to be tricky, or, yesterday went badly, or you're not, it's very easy to be thinking about something that's going to happen in the future or something that happened. Yes. Come to now, and so be fully present, and some little sensations, hearing, sight, touch, can just bring you into the now, and that is going to improve your ability to really be with yourself and with other people.
Yeah, I think that's a nice example, and also one that popped up in my head. I think what I also really love is, if you feel comfortable enough, right, with people in the organization, ask one person near you to indeed, hey, give feedback when you see me in flight mode, in autopilot mode, and help. Let somebody help you learn in this journey.
Yeah, no, I think that absolutely, the more you can make it easy for them and safe for them, the better the results and the better the feedback you'll get.
Yeah. All right. I hope we've inspired again some leaders, right, to have some more compassion, vision about the people around them. So I think in the end, they will be faster, better, more sustainable, human-centric transformations.
Absolutely.
So thanks so much. And
thank you.
Till next time.
Indeed.